Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. On this episode, we have Lily Nichols, who is a registered dietitian nutritionist, a certified diabetes educator, and she is an author of 3 books that you might know of: Real Food for Pregnancy, Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, and in her new book, Real Food for Fertility. On this episode, we talk about all things gestational diabetes with Lily, from preconception planning to help decrease your risk of developing gestational diabetes, as well as a gestational diabetes test and alternatives, and then how to manage gestational diabetes during pregnancy. What are the long-term complications for gestational diabetes for not just you and baby?
In addition to talking about gestational diabetes, we have a conversation on the difference between the recommended daily allowance and optimal nourishment based on current research and why these two are different. We also discuss how the recommended daily allowance is based on research studies that don't even include pregnant women, and what you can do to better source your prenatal nutrition advice throughout your pregnancy. Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And I'm Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the MamasteFit podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable, because pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experience as mothers navigating this stage in our lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you have chosen us to support you.
Welcome to the MamasteFit podcast. In this episode, we have Lily Nichols, who is a registered dietitian that focuses on the perinatal timeframe. Thank you so much for being here, Lily.
Thank you for having me.
So what kind of brought you to the perinatal timeframe as your focus for registered dietitian as your job?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of fell into this role a little bit by accident. Very early on in my career as a dietitian, there was a job opening with the state of California's diabetes and pregnancy program. And I was curious and I took it. And that's really what got me in the field, but also kept me interested in this area. I think it's easy to acknowledge the importance of prenatal nutrition on a baby's development, but I didn't know how important blood sugar regulation is to a baby's lifelong health, not just like the health of the pregnancy at hand. So like children who are born to mothers with poorly controlled blood sugar can face anywhere from a 6 to 19-fold increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes over their lifetime, because what they're exposed to in utero can affect their development, ultimately, the development of their pancreas, how their glucose and insulin regulation functions. And that was like a big light bulb moment for me, because I was like, wow, we can really impact not only the health of the mom during her specific pregnancy, but also like the lifelong health of her children. Like we can affect the next generation. And that was huge for me.
So I know gestational diabetes is like this really big complication that a lot of people are worried about, especially like a big question that we get is the gestational diabetes test during that second trimester into third trimester, and that there's all these alternatives. What is your thought on the alternatives of the gestational diabetes test? And then, like, are you pro the alternatives, or do you think like the traditional gestational glucola test is like a better test?
It depends on which alternative you're talking about. So first, I think we need to identify why people don't want to do the glucose tolerance test in the first place. There's many different reasons, and I'm not going to say any of them are right and wrong. I actually personally opted out of it in my second pregnancy. So kind of like identifying what the issue is. Is it that you don't want the sugar load? Is it that you eat a relatively low-carb diet and you're worried about a false positive, because that's a legitimate concern? Is your concern like the other ingredients that are in it that you don't want? And that will kind of help you define what sort of alternative might work for you. If you're worried about like the large amount of sugar at one time, or getting a false positive because you eat a lower carbohydrate diet and don't want a carb load leading up to the test, which would be how you would avoid getting a false positive on it, then maybe you're better suited to just monitoring your blood sugar at home for 1 to 2 weeks if your provider is open and willing to accept that as a proxy for how well your blood sugar metabolism is working. If you're concerned about the other like added ingredients like the dyes or the brominated vegetable oil or whatever, there are alternatives that don't have all of those ingredients. I'm not affiliated with any of those brands, but like the Fresh Test is one example, or you can literally just buy dextrose, measure out on a food scale, 50 grams. Dextrose and glucose are the same thing, just different names. And mix it in water and drink it, like unflavored, pure. Like the point of the glucose tolerance test is really to see what is your glycemic response to a measured amount of glucose specifically. So that could be an option. Some of the other alternatives that are like eat a meal or drink juice or eat a specified amount of jelly beans or something like that tend to not be as accurate. Like for the jelly bean test, for example, the only time that has been shown to be equivalent is if you're doing the 1 hour 50 gram test, not the follow-up longer, higher sugar test. And also in the study methods, they like sent the specific brand of jelly beans out to a lab to analyze the content to count out the right amount of jelly beans. There's jelly beans differ in size and their composition. It would be very difficult to get exactly that 50 gram dose that you want. If you're doing a mixed meal, again, unless you're using a food scale, it's going to be pretty hard to get right on the 50 gram mark. Plus, if you're doing a meal, not all the carbohydrates in that meal are glucose. If you're drinking juice, not all the carbohydrates in the juice are glucose. You also have fructose. So it just throws off the whole point of the test, which is to get a very specific measurement of glucose, blood glucose, in response to ingesting a very specific amount of glucose specifically, not just all carbohydrates. So I think you have options, but it would either be like a cleaner version, so to speak, of the glucose tolerance test, or just measuring your blood sugar at home. There is like one exception where like you can test for gestational diabetes actually in the first trimester, the hemoglobin A1C, but you don't use A1C later in pregnancy for gestational diabetes screening for a number of reasons. So really you're left with kind of those two options if you're thinking of testing at that 24 to 28 week mark.
So it sounds like the glucose test is pretty important for someone to take, either taking the glucola drink, using an alternative like the Fresh Test, or monitoring your own blood sugars. And so I think it's important to have some sort of assessment done. Could you explain more why it's really important for someone to know whether or not they have gestational diabetes? I know you discussed at the beginning about the impacts on baby. And then Roxanne, if there's anything that you need to add in, please do as well.
Yeah, so I already mentioned how, elevated blood sugar can affect the baby's development. It will affect the development of their pancreas and how much insulin they produce and their likelihood of becoming insulin resistant or diabetic during their lifetime. So that is arguably the major concern. We're also concerned because high blood sugar can affect mom's risk of other complications as well. So women with gestational diabetes tend to have a higher rate of preeclampsia, for example. There can be some issues specifically surrounding the time of birth and how well that baby adapts to life outside the womb, so to speak. Elevated blood sugar can affect baby's lung development, so a higher chance they might need, help with breathing. Their blood sugar can drop too low after birth once you cut the umbilical cord and their like steady stream of sugar is cut off, but their insulin levels are still high. That can cause hypoglycemia in the baby. That can also be like a medical emergency. The baby can also grow, abnormally large, like they have a higher percent body fat, but a more difficult time accessing that body fat to be used as fuel. That can also be an issue with the hypoglycemia situation. But it can also pose some challenges with delivery. Whether warranted or not, it can increase the likelihood they might recommend a C-section. There is a higher rate of like shoulder dystocia in women who had gestational diabetes. So the shoulders can be like disproportionately large and get stuck at delivery. So, there's some immediate effects, but my big focus is really on like the long-term effects. So we want to make sure that, baby is set up for, a lifetime of metabolic health.
which I don't think a lot of people understand about gestational diabetes, or even providers will even talk about that, like long-term effect. They're like, yes, gestational diabetes, you can grow a baby that's too large for you and you might have to have a C-section, is like the one that I think most people know about and understand. That like,
Yeah.
oh, well, my provider told me that if I don't take this test, I could have gestational diabetes. My baby could be too large and then I need to have a C-section. But they don't discuss, like, if you have gestational diabetes, this could affect your baby if you don't control your sugars in like their future. And I think that that's really important that people know, because like gestational diabetes, it's not super common. Not everybody is getting it. I mean, I don't know the exact statistic, but like there is a likelihood that you could get it and you might not know if you're not doing the test or you're not doing the test appropriately. And then this could affect your baby. And I think, I know you said like after birth, hypoglycemia after birth can happen, depending on like what you ate during labor. Like your blood sugars could be adjusted during your labor, and these babies could come out and they have a high insulin rate. And then even if they're feeding really well, you can't make up that amount of sugar, that the insulin that they've created. And that's why we're checking those blood sugars in that postpartum period for these babies in the hospital, which is another concern people have. They're like, well, I don't want them to like prick my baby's heel like unnecessarily. And I'm like, it could, like your baby could be fine. Genuinely, if you had really well controlled blood sugars, this baby could be fine. But like, we're not checking your blood sugar every like hour during labor. So like potentially you could have had a spike like shortly before baby came out, and then this could affect, like they might need to get sugars, or maybe they're not feeding very well and then this drops their blood sugars because they had a lot of insulin. And so I don't want to like scare people about gestational diabetes, but it is a serious complication that we do want to address during pregnancy and postpartum and monitor these babies for that hypoglycemia, because again, it can affect them long term.
Yeah, definitely in those first like couple hours post-birth and first 24 hours. I mean, I think people need to understand that pregnancy physiology does change, particularly toward the end of pregnancy. Your body becomes more efficient at mobilizing your fat stores to burn for fuel. And babies, too, also become fat adapted in that third trimester. When they're born, they remain fat adapted. They're actually in pretty deep ketosis. The highest ketone levels you see in babies are in the first couple days when the colostrum is transitioning to mature milk. They're mobilizing their fetal or their neonatal at this time fat stores for energy. But if their insulin levels are high, they can't do that because insulin doesn't let you mobilize your body's stores. It's trying to store external energy into larger stores. So that adaptation, they're just not really well adapted to that normal physiological process. So we really, at best, we need to improve maternal blood sugar control, which affects babies' blood sugar levels and insulin levels. And then they have a much easier time adjusting. I do want to point out that, I think gestational diabetes is really presented as like this doom and gloom kind of diagnosis, that if you have it, you're automatically high risk and automatically like all these bad things are going to happen. And that's 100% not the case. As somebody who's worked directly clinically with hundreds and hundreds of clients, and now I have thousands of people who use my books and report back on what they're doing. I have, an online course on gestational diabetes where I'm hearing directly from women as well. You can have a perfectly healthy pregnancy despite the diagnosis. It all comes down to your blood sugar levels. How well are you keeping your blood sugar levels in range? An occasional spike really, truly is no big deal, assuming it's not like ridiculously high. But a spike, 10, 20 points over goal is not going to make or break the health of your pregnancy. It's really like, where's your blood sugar day in, day out, overnight? Are you eating meals that are spiking your blood sugar like 3 times a day, plus snacks, spiking it even more? Or are you staying pretty well within range? Because many, many cases can be really well controlled and they have perfectly healthy, normal-sized babies, non-issue deliveries, and everything's fine. So I also want to paint that picture too. It's like important to identify and like monitor and intervene, but we don't have to make it like a fear factor thing. I think our medical system is already making it scary enough. So educate and then empower, Yeah.
And I mean, the number of people who are diet controlled, like recently that I've seen, like, I mean, granted, I haven't been in the hospital for about 2 years now, but before I left, like the number of people who are more diet controlled rather than having to be on insulin or any sort of medications was a large portion of them with gestational diabetes were just able to introduce exercise and diet, and they were able to control their blood sugars with just that rather than having to go on medication, which makes it a little bit harder to manage.
Definitely. And we can also reduce the chances that a woman will require insulin or blood sugar medication by 50% with better dietary advice. So really
That's
giving
amazing.
them the tools. And that's not just, well, that is my clinical experience, but we also have published data on that. You intervene with a low glycemic index diet where you're giving them better quality, less processed carbohydrates that spike their blood sugar less. And you don't necessitate always the need for insulin shots, you know? So there's always going to be some cases that do need medication because people's insulin resistance levels and their insulin production, it varies, of course. But we were able to significantly reduce the percentage of our clients who needed medication therapy. And it does make everything easier if you're able to avoid that. It makes the delivery less complicated as well. You tend to retain more choices in where or how you birth too. When you don't have to have medications. Whether I agree with that or not is a different thing because there's a spectrum of like, you need a tiny little dose of insulin at night for your fasting blood sugar versus somebody who's on, you know, insulin with every meal plus metformin, you know, and their insulin resistance levels are like insane, you know, and their blood sugar is really erratic. That's like a totally different clinical scenario. But nonetheless, usually there is some sort of guidance on, okay, well, if you're on insulin, you can no longer deliver here and it has to be in the hospital or whatever.
So is there anything that someone can do before like the gestational diabetes test to help kind of decrease their risk of developing it? I know like resistance training and like aerobic activity can be really beneficial to decreasing someone's risk by like almost 30 to 40%. But your expertise is nutrition. So is there any sort of nutrition guidance that someone could follow to help kind of decrease the risk of developing it? And then if they do develop it, do you have any advice nutritionally on what they can do to help keep it within that diet and exercise controlled realm?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, exercise you mentioned is a huge one. There's some other data showing that women who exercised pre-pregnancy and continued through most of their pregnancy, they had a 79% lower risk of developing gestational diabetes. So exercise is huge. I think there's a bit of a difference in like, I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. You know, sort of long-term habits that are reducing your risk of gestational diabetes or short-term, do this thing to try to increase your chance of passing the test. And those are,
I would say the long-term.
thing.
But if there is a trick, I mean,
but we don't want people to like trick the test if they have an issue. But
we could talk about
I think we're looking at long-term habits that someone could start doing like pre-pregnancy or like early in their pregnancy if it was a surprise, which for I think most people, it's I think over 50% of pregnancies are oops. So like something that someone can do like preconception or early in pregnancy to help kind of set themselves up best throughout to have a healthy pregnancy, like nutritionally, which I guess is like a lot of things, but like
just read the book.
Well, you know, preconception, of course, is the optimal time to get your health really in a good place. But like you said, like not everybody has the luxury of planning ahead. So if you do, you know, preconception, maintaining as best you can, like a healthy body weight and a healthy body composition. So putting on some muscle mass, some lean body mass is more metabolically efficient at using glucose. I would say keeping your insulin levels at sort of on the lower end, I mean, in the normal range, but a lot of people are walking around with high insulin levels, but normal blood sugar, and they have no idea. It's really just a state of insulin resistance.
How do you check?
Technically, how would you check that? You could check fasting insulin levels as well as checking people's glucose levels. So you could do fasting insulin or hemoglobin A1C. Or there's even like a glucose tolerance test that combines it with checks for insulin called a Kraft insulin assay. That would be like a little more next level to explore. But I think a fasting insulin combined with fasting blood sugar and a hemoglobin A1C would give you a pretty good indication of where you're at with that. And we do start to see higher rates of prediabetes as fasting insulin rises above about 9, even though the normal range on many lab tests says just it needs to be less than 25. So I'm going to throw out just a little data point there in case anybody's going to check that. But even if you don't have a fasting insulin, just keeping your glucose at a healthy level usually to some degree indicates your body's insulin is at a good place, but you can like spike your blood sugar a lot and spike your insulin a lot, and your body kind of reaches a higher set point with higher insulin levels kind of around the clock.
And just
that
like waiting
is kind of hard to see if that's happening or not unless you're testing your fasting insulin levels. So so that is something to consider, because we do know that, technically you can screen for gestational diabetes early in pregnancy with a hemoglobin A1C. Your A1C reflects your average blood sugar from the last 2 to 3 months. If you're taking it in the first trimester, you're kind of capturing a little bit of the preconception. And people who are in the pre-diabetic range, the chances that they would go on to later fail a glucose tolerance test is like 98.4%. So some guidelines, like California Diabetes and Pregnancy Program guidelines that I worked on, we actually do screen hemoglobin A1C in the first trimester as an early indication of whether or not there's an issue here. And anybody in the pre-diabetic range, they get immediate gestational diabetes, like diet education, and they monitor their blood sugar. And then you have 2/3 of the pregnancy to intervene versus waiting to the end. So throwing that one out there, maintaining optimal levels of micronutrients that are involved in blood sugar regulation can be helpful. So some that are relevant to this would be vitamin D and magnesium. You could argue chromium and a few others. There's also a B vitamin-like compound called inositol, which is really commonly used in helping women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, or PCOS. They actually have used inositol in clinical trials head-to-head with metformin because it is so effective at lowering levels of insulin resistance. The nice thing about inositol is there's no harmful effects on fertility or pregnancy, and we have trials using it in pregnancy, both for preventing gestational diabetes and also treating already diagnosed gestational diabetes, improving blood sugar levels. So that is it's a supplement. It has a nice, pleasant taste. You can get it in like a powder form, mix it in water. And that's a fairly easy, relative to other things, fairly low cost intervention that's really helpful. And then if I could just add one more, I would say consume adequate amounts of protein. In practice, what I see is the people who have the greatest challenges with blood sugar levels are often not eating enough protein, and our like dietary recommendations on them, like across population wide, but particularly for women of childbearing age and women who are pregnant, are too low, like at least 50% too low. So definitely get enough protein, particularly at breakfast. We have tons of research on composition of the breakfast meal in particular and how that affects your blood sugar and insulin levels, and also like cravings and, how much you want to have sweet foods, how large of a portion you might eat at a subsequent meal. And people who get plenty of protein at breakfast specifically do better on all of those markers. They have lower blood sugar levels and insulin levels and cortisol levels for the rest of the day. They have lower levels of cravings. They just naturally, even if they're given access to an all-you-can-eat buffet, eat less at subsequent meals because their blood sugar regulation started out at a really good place at the beginning of the day. Versus if you eat like a really high carbohydrate breakfast and your blood sugar spikes, your insulin is also going to spike and then crash. And when your blood sugar is low, it's not a willpower thing. You get a physiological signal that your body needs energy. and you're going to be driven to eat something that's going to boost your energy levels and blood sugar up, like carbs and sugar. So
my Lucky Charms are not a good breakfast meal choice.
I mean, you could play around with it and see what happens. Like if within an hour or two, you're like, man, I'm starving. That could really go for a donut or a sweetened coffee or something. That's a pretty good sign that your blood sugar is tanked.
I feel like I should start a food journal just to see the difference. Because we went to a retreat with a bunch of dietitians, and all of them for breakfast would eat the leftover food from dinner of like steaks and like high protein meals. They're like, we're going to eat this for breakfast tomorrow. I was like, what do you mean you're going to eat dinner for breakfast?
What about
they're
my
like,
pastry?
They're like, you need protein. Like you need to eat high protein breakfast to sustain you for the rest of the day, or else you're just going to eat garbage the rest of the day. And I was like, but I like my pastry. And they're like, you're going to be hungry in an hour, Roxanne. And I'm like, well, we'll cross that bridge when it comes.
Here's my trick. I mean, you have the protein and then save your pastry for after. You won't be as hungry for as much of it. But even the order in which you consume things changes your blood sugar response. So if you front load with your protein or vegetables and then have a little treat after the fact, it has less of a detrimental effect on your blood sugar than if you have the sweet thing first followed by the protein stuff. So you can also do that and not be entirely deprived. I'm not entirely deprived of sweets and sugar either.
I have heard that the food order can really impact your blood sugar level. I'm really trying here.
Gina's trying.
But I have heard that like food order can impact your blood sugar levels. And I think we saw it on some Instagram page that was like, eat your protein and then eat your sugar. And like, so we'll purposely try to eat our protein first and then like our sugary cereal.
Yeah. But sometimes I still do not do it right. We're learning.
Jessie of Glucose Goddess has done a whole lot of work around that with really helpful graphs.
Yeah, I think it was her page. We saw that.
She's
stuff.
awesome.
Yeah, she's great.
You mentioned this a little bit about the recommendation of like protein versus like the optimal levels of protein. And I know like we could go down just a whole like black hole talking about the different recommendations versus optimal. But what is the optimal amount of protein that someone should be eating in a day?
During pregnancy.
Yes.
Okay, during pregnancy.
Or preconception too.
We could do both. So they're kind of related. So, our recommended dietary allowance is 0.8 grams per kilogram, which equates to about 10% of your calories from protein. It's quite low. So like for an average woman, they suggest 45 grams of protein per day. Now, if I were to eat 45 grams of protein per day, I would feel like I was dying because I'd be so hungry and my blood sugar would be a disaster. Because I've done that before. I've done the high carb, fairly low protein, low fat eating, and it's a disaster for my blood sugar and energy levels, and I feel like a complete hot mess. What we have to remember that the RDA is really set at a level to prevent extreme protein deficiency, but it's not set at a level that's optimal. And we've had quite an explosion in the research on optimal protein intake in the last 10, 20 years, just in the way that research methods have shifted. And now, I mean, it's arguable. People have different opinions, but I would say a bare minimum would be 1.2 grams per kilogram. Ideally, it's probably closer to a minimum of 1.5 grams per kilogram or even higher than that. For female athletes, for example, quite a bit of research suggests 1.6 grams per kilogram. If you're looking at that, 1.6 versus 0.8, I mean, that's double what the recommendation is. And the thing is it's hard to like overeat protein because it's so satiating. Think about sitting down to a meal that has like a big portion of chicken or steak or something. Like you get full relatively quickly. Not that many bites in, you're like, wow, I'm starting to feel full. Versus if it's a plate of macaroni and cheese or mashed potatoes or rice or something, I mean, we could just eat and eat and eat forever.
Yes.
So I would definitely err on that side of things, the higher side. For pregnancy, it's similar, and it depends on the stage of pregnancy that you're at. So in early pregnancy, no less than about 1.2 grams per kilogram. as you get towards later pregnancy, no less than 1.5. And this comes from, people are shocked to hear this, but this comes from research done in 2015, and it marked the first ever study that measured protein requirements in pregnant women, which means that
2015.
our previous guidelines were based pretty much entirely on non-pregnant humans, and then they use a mathematical estimate to adjust it slightly up, accounting for that you need to gain weight and like you're growing a baby and the baby might use X amount of protein, but it was a total guesstimate. And in late pregnancy, for example, like it underestimated needs by quite a bit, like over 70%. So it's not like, oh, it's just a 5% margin of error. Like, no, you got it very, very wrong. Yeah.
Let's take a quick break from this episode to talk about our sponsor, Needed, which is a nutrition company focused on the perinatal timeframe. One of their products that we personally love and I take every day is their collagen protein. So we were just talking about the recommendations versus the optimal levels of protein that we need during preconception and pregnancy, and it is way higher than that recommended amount based off of research. And protein is really hard to eat a lot of. So I personally have protein fills you up a lot. So it's hard to get that amount. And so we like to supplement our diet with collagen protein, and we love Needed's collagen protein to add that additional protein that we're not able to get in just from protein-rich foods. It dissolves really easily. It doesn't add any extra flavor. And I know that they are sourcing a great collagen protein to put into their products.
So for me, I like to add my collagen protein either to my morning coffee, my morning orange juice, or whatever juice that I'm drinking, in addition to adding it to like my oatmeal or even my cereal, because it dissolves so easily into my food and it gives me a really easy source of protein to have first thing in the morning. And for me right now in my first trimester, eating protein is really, really important so that I don't just throw up randomly throughout my day. It helps to regulate my blood sugar. And so eating protein first thing in the morning has been helping me with my first trimester nausea as well. And so incorporating into my breakfast meal has been really helpful. And then also incorporating it now that I'm starting to work out again after my workouts as well to help as a recovery thing as well. So if you would like to check out Needed, you can check them out at thisisneeded.com and use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order for 3 months of subscription.
Let's get back to the episode.
So I have heard that about a lot of prenatal nutrition guidance that's out there right now. So what's coming from governing bodies, that a lot of the recommended dosages are based on studies that didn't even include pregnant women or even just women in general. Some of the studies included primarily men, because women weren't really even being included in studies until 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And it takes forever for things to get updated. Is that true, or did I just make some things up? I mean, it sounds like it's true.
No, that is true. And you may have actually found it from my Instagram page, because I do research.
Probably did.
Over on my Instagram. And so I'm actually going to go, since I don't have everything memorized in my brain, I'm going to see if I can find, here's the study. So this was a 2021 paper about how limited data exists to inform our basic understanding of micronutrient requirements in pregnancy. So they looked at, they analyzed the 704 studies they used in setting what's called the dietary reference intakes, or DRIs, for pregnancy. So of all the studies included, only 17% included a single pregnant or lactating participant.
Stop.
Out of all participants in all studies used to set the pregnancy DRIs, only 4.6% of participants were pregnant or lactating. For 16 of 23 micronutrients, the reports did not consider any study including pregnant or lactating women in selecting key indicators. Yeah, and likewise for setting the so-called upper limits, 18 out of the 23 micronutrients, they didn't have any data in pregnant or lactating women either. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are based on a best guess. In some ways, the more that I learn about this, because this has kind of become my career now, is identifying, okay, let's really dig into how this recommendation was set. It's one thing to just, I mean, most clinicians will just assume that the recommendations are accurate. Otherwise, there had to be plenty of data to set those recommendations. And every time I dive in, it's like, oh, okay, I pick a nutrient. Okay, let's look at choline. How is that set? Oh, that was set by some feeding studies done in adult men where they deprived them of choline and it caused liver problems, and then they gave them choline and their liver problems went away. Okay, how was it set for women? Oh, they just took what was found from that study and like for non-pregnant women, they estimated it down because our body weight is lower. And for pregnant women, since they gain weight and it's assumed the baby needs some, they bumped it up a little. And that's it. And now
I just assumed the baby needs some.
Yeah. More than 20 years later, we now have randomized controlled trials where they have assigned pregnant women in their third trimester to either have like the recommended intake level versus double, literally, actually more than double the recommended intake level. And they look at what happens to their babies. We know choline is really vital to brain development, for example.
Yeah.
So they looked at these kids all through toddlerhood, and at every single time point, they tested their cognitive and intelligence scores. The children in the high choline group did better. And now they've extended this analysis. These kids are now age 7, and they've gone through another round of tests. They've published follow-up research on this using the same cohort. And again, at age 7, they score better on these cognitive tests.
Oh, man.
Regardless of what they ate during childhood or how they were fed as infants. So the only time point of the intervention was the third trimester of pregnancy.
Well, I'm glad I ate 4 eggs this morning.
Know. That's crazy because with my first pregnancy, I craved eggs. I would eat like 3 hard-boiled eggs for breakfast like almost every day with Lily's pregnancy, which is like my daughter's named Lily too. And I mean, I think she's incredibly a genius. And then with this pregnancy, I took a choline supplement literally every single day, and Joan is a genius.
Good job. Good job.
At 5 months. She is
A+.
Very cognitively aware. So I saw that study when I was pregnant with Colin. So I started supplementing with choline or like eating a lot of eggs. And I think that's wild that the recommendation is so much lower, but there's also research to support that. But like the recommendation has not changed, or has it?
It has not changed yet.
It has not changed.
It probably won't for a while.
The part that is just wild to me is that so many like prenatal companies who create prenatals that you're supposed to take throughout your pregnancy is, well, the designer, but I'm just talking about even like women's one a day. That is all based off of the recommended daily allowance. Like all of them are like, yeah, you need this much choline or this much like vitamin D during your pregnancy based off the recommendation daily allowance, not the optimal levels. So like people are taking their prenatals thinking like, I'm doing a great job for my baby. When in actuality, like they should have way more in there.
But then it's hard because you have like medical providers on social media that are demonizing these prenatal vitamin companies that are looking at optimal levels of nourishment that are needed. True. And so we have these like quote unquote designer prenatals that are being designed that are looking at like current research and what the optimal nourishment levels are. And they're all acknowledging like, hey, the current guidance is outdated. Like current research is saying a lot of other stuff. And so they're creating a better product to give to the consumer. But then you have medical providers that are like, no, this is not what our governing body recommends. And so it becomes this like weird dynamic where you want people to trust their medical providers, but like also the medical providers don't have time to dive into prenatal nutrition
like you.
And so it becomes like, well, who do we trust at this point? And in my opinion, like I don't believe that my doctor or my midwife has to be my sole source of information throughout my entire pregnancy. Like, I think I should be able to go to them for things that are specific to my prenatal health and the well-being of my baby and any complications that I'm developing. But if I'm looking for nutrition advice, I want to go to the prenatal nutritionist or the perinatal nutritionist and registered dietitians that are like focusing all of their energy and their research on current guidance.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you have this like weird dynamic. And I think a lot of people like want to only go to their provider for everything related to their pregnancy, because we've been taught like this is who gives you all the answers. Like you need someone to give you answers throughout your pregnancy and hold your hand through the whole process. But man, it's tough. Yeah, I like to go to prenatal nutritionists when I have specific nutrition.
Yeah, most medical schools don't really have much on nutrition. So
Yeah. I think it's probably like one class. I think I have one class on pregnancy.
yeah, it's not much.
We should not be the experts on like nutrition because we are experts at like pregnancy and birth. Like midwives and providers and OBs are experts on delivering, helping you have your baby. But
Right.
we shouldn't be expected to learn not just that, but also like what is the optimal levels of vitamin D during pregnancy?
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. I think we need to, the whole point of our healthcare system being what it is and having all these different career paths is that we're allied health professionals. We have allies.
Exactly.
We have people that we can
Yes,
rely on.
collaboration.
Your doctor isn't necessarily as knowledgeable about like what to do for your hurt XYZ, like your shoulder or something that has like that you're recovering from like a, rotor cuff injury. Like the physical therapist has the training and what sort of movements and activities you can do to improve that. And we rely on them. So yeah, it's a really strange environment with social media influencers, including some like doctors who are social media influencers who think that they just know all. And I'm not going to call anybody out like specifically, but there definitely are some who have made it really almost their entire platform to try to tear down dietitians who are sharing up-to-date nutrition information. And I have been, unfortunately, on the receiving end of this, and it gets wild. I mean, you get death threats and things. Like, people are nuts. Some of their followers are nuts. I take the high road. I mean, honestly, it's like we need to provide the education and give our clients the opportunity to make a choice for themselves. If you don't want to take my information, my feelings aren't hurt. Like, I write books, I put content out, I make professional webinars, I train other professionals to hopefully give up-to-date advice. But I think it's up to the person to kind of choose where they get their information from. I do want to point out something about the prenatal vitamin conversation, though, that I think is worth saying. I think as consumers, we assume that something labeled a prenatal vitamin is complete because, of course, there must be some sort of regulation around using the term prenatal vitamin, and there is not. There is no government requirements or regulatory requirements on what qualifies as a prenatal. So the market is like, there is a very wide margin in quality, price point, dosages, types of nutrients, numbers of nutrients, the forms of nutrients, and whether your body can actually utilize them or not. Like, it is just a minefield out there. And so when you mentioned, choline in prenatal vitamins, for example, choline is a really, it's one that most prenatals leave out. There are more, whether you call them designer or not, there are more that are including choline, but it has a trade-off. Choline supplements often have a strong odor that doesn't smell good, so that maybe makes the product a little more off-putting. It is a really bulky nutrient. It takes up a lot of capsule space, which means you're never going to get you're never going to get your daily choline intake in a single capsule in the context of a multivitamin. You're probably going to have to add even several capsules to that daily dosage just for the choline alone. And then it's expensive. So the consumer is then paying more for a product. So when people are like, well, I could just get a 1-a-day prenatal at Walgreens for $12 and this one is $50. What the heck? What's the difference? It's like, well,
yeah,
let me list like
a
the
lot.
35 differences. They are actually significantly different. And that's not to say every quality prenatal is really expensive, but it's probably going to come in at more than, $10 a month for a supply, because just the raw ingredients alone is more than $10. Like, quality products take money because the quality ingredients cost more. So it's really tricky as a consumer because you want to just trust that anything that's a prenatal is complete and great. And while it's still probably better than nothing, many of them are not complete because there's no guidelines on what counts as complete or what counts as a prenatal in the first place.
Which is wild. I didn't realize that there was no I mean, I knew supplements weren't regulated, but I didn't
the FDA
realize
does
it
not
was
have time to do
because they have rules on you can't put organic on certain types of things. I think maybe I made that up. I don't know, but I was surprised that you could put prenatal vitamin on anything.
Yeah,
and it's sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lily, for coming on to our podcast. Where can our listeners come and learn more from you? I know that you have a few books out right now that folks can grab to learn more about nutrition during pregnancy, and then even one specific to gestational diabetes. And then you mentioned an online course. So how can our listeners learn more from you?
Sure. You can find me on my website. So it's lilynicholsrdn.com. Up there, you'll see the links to my books. You can download the first chapter of Real Food for Pregnancy for free. There's a library of resources. So many of the topics we discuss, there's articles on it. So use the search bar, just scroll through the blog to find things that interest you. And then as far as social media, I'm most active on Instagram. So my handle is the same as my website, Lily Nichols RDN. You mentioned my 2 books, and by the time this interview goes out, my 3rd book on fertility will be out. So check that out. It's called Real Food for Fertility. So if you have questions specifically on preconception, what to do to optimize egg quality, sperm quality, tackle PCOS or hypothalamic amenorrhea, optimize the health of your menstrual cycle, build your nutrient stores before you get pregnant, improve your blood sugar and metabolic health in advance of pregnancy, that would be the place to go. So definitely check that out.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was really great talking to you all about gestational diabetes, things that people can do to prepare for pregnancy, and then all about what optimal nourishment even means. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you want to learn more from us and you're pregnant, you can join our online prenatal fitness programs and childbirth education course. You can also bundle the 2 of them together to save 15% off our full prenatal programs and our full childbirth education course. If you're postpartum and you want to continue to work out with us, we have our early postpartum recovery course, which is designed to do from birth until about 4 to 6 weeks postpartum. And this is a free course and gift to you. After that, you can join our postpartum return to fitness programs to help you return through the rehabilitation process postpartum, all the way to return to the sports you love, such as lifting weights, running, Olympic weightlifting, or if you're a first responder or military service members, helping you return to duty. If you're a professional and you want to learn more from us and earn CEUs, you can join our Birth Workers Professional course and our Fitness Trainers course. You can check out all of our courses at MamasteFit.com. And as a thank you for listening to the entire episode, you can use code STORY10 to get 10% off.
This podcast is sponsored by Needed, a nutrition company focused on the perinatal time frame. You can use code MamastePod to get 20% off your own order or the first 3 months of your subscription.